And we are live. I was
All right.
kind of thinking about the beginning of Wayne and Garth when they're going into the big studio, and remember they're teaching the guy how to say do the countdown and say you're live.
I have not seen that movie in years.
Yeah, we watched it on a whim the other day. It was still awesome after this many years.
Good times. I'm gonna go ahead. So I don't think it's just the two of us right now. I'm gonna go ahead and tweet that we are live.
Yep.
Here we go. All right.
We are live from the basement. Nick is coming from sunny California. I'm coming from
It
so
is
sunny.
It is not sunny today. It's very gray outside. And hopefully we'll get some rain. Right. Always hoping for rain in California. But yeah, Happy New Year, Ed.
Yeah.
First time we've really talked since before Christmas.
Yep. Happy New Year to you. Hope you had a nice time off. No, not too much COVID. Not too much. Lots of fun stuff.
Yeah, even if I had COVID, I couldn't find a test to tell you. So I don't really know, if I had it or not. I did have couple slow days, but no, feeling good. I hope things are good in Atlanta as well.
Yeah, we did really well. I mean, we had to get my daughter tested before she went back to class, and trying to find a test was unreal. It was just unreal.
You can't do it here. You just can't find them. Even if you were to find them, the line to get it would just be hours long. But let's talk observability, right?
Let's talk about the new year.
Let's talk about the new year. Yeah. So still dealing with Log4j, right? That's still an issue going on. We're still seeing more patches come out. The FTC recently advised companies they should take this seriously and get their stuff patched. So hopefully things are moving along. If you go to the Cribl blog, we've got lots of resources on how we can help with that. And if you get stuck, join the community. The link's at the bottom of the screen. That's still an issue going on. What did you notice in the new year, Ed?
I think the biggest thing I'm seeing in the new year is we have an awful lot of teams know they need to get an awful lot of stuff done and are just not sure how to get there. It's just, I think for some of the leaders, some of the engineering leaders I'm seeing, they're just, we need to go to cloud. We need to be secure. We need to patch Log4j. We need to be able to hire. We need to be able to do all these things. And the clear direction of how to get from where we are now to where we want to be in the future, it's increasingly cloudy and it's hard. And I mean, even for high performing teams, even with well-resourced teams, it's a struggle.
Yeah, definitely. Everything's number one priority at this point. And you got to do all this. You got to stay within your budget. And I think, hiring is just so challenging right now. I was talking to somebody, getting ready to graduate high school, going to college here in the spring. He's like, what do I do? I said, cybersecurity, because there's just unlimited demand for those types of roles right now.
One thing I am seeing is that I think is kind of a little interesting, and I'm hoping companies will take a different turn, is I'm a weird person. I like to read job descriptions, and increasingly I'm seeing, even for minor roles, a demand for very senior people. And frankly, I think that's a mistake in this hiring environment where even with premium salaries, even if minor, mid premium salaries, the likelihood of getting a superstar is just not great. And so I think that you have to have pipelines to grow your own talent. You have to be willing to look for non-traditional sources, people who don't necessarily have an IT degree, but have programs where you can grow as internships and through juniors, and not asking. I mean, literally, I saw for a SOC analyst job looking for a CISSP, which is kind of absurd. And if you can't hire the talent, you got to grow your talent. And
I think people are looking for that unicorn hire. Sure. Like every job description is like, it's like a kid's letter to Santa. Like I want a pony and I want a new Xbox and a PlayStation. And so I think people, you're exactly right. I've seen this in the data and analytics space. People they don't have a realistic view of what kind of hires they want to make. And so they're looking for this like omnibus role. And it's not, I don't think they're having much success trying to find these roles.
I mean, you need a couple of people that leadership in your architecture, but you got to have a data pipeline. And I think the smart companies start looking toward places they make, you start looking at potential, you start looking at attitude, you start looking at just smarts to someone, we can grow them into something. We can grow them into that A-list, that A-list person over time.
Yeah.
And because, you got to look at other options.
Yeah, and I think hiring in tech has been broken for a very long time. You see a
Mhm.
lot of that here in Silicon Valley. I can tell you one of the worst interviews I ever had was like 8 hours stuck in like a conference room, no food, no water, barely getting restroom breaks. And I didn't end up getting the job, right? So it's like, that's a whole completely wasted day. And my sentiment for that company is very low at even today.
Mhm.
And this was years ago. So I think we need a change in hiring.
It's just one last example. Like when I was hiring, I decided like I'm gonna look for college kids. I'm not gonna even look for college kids who have computer science degrees, but I'm looking for kids who have interest, who have, and it's the thing for me to say kids because I'm old. But you're bringing in like a 22-year-old, but I'm looking for show me your projects, your extracurricular projects. Show me the kind of interest that you want to do at home because that's what I was looking for: potential and a great attitude. It was amazing to watch these guys grow and become, and even though they left the company 5 6 years later, you've got people who were willing to work, willing to learn at a very reasonable entry point, and then you grow them, and it's been remarkable to watch the growth, and it's fun, but but you got to invest the time, and you got to be willing to bring in and train people. You got to be willing to mentor
Yeah.
them.
Software engineering, cybersecurity, you name it, like all this stuff is an apprenticeship, right? Like you
Mhm.
have to learn on the job. You have to be able, first thing is, can this person learn, right? Do they have a
Yep.
unique perspective on what they do or how they do it? My undergrad was economics and finance. And I made a career in tech, so I think just having and that gave me a different way to look at the world, right? Like
Yes.
economics is about scarcity and opportunity cost. And that's a pretty interesting way to look at like how you develop software and things like that. So I think
Yep.
it's going to be interesting to see what happens in hiring going into 2022.
Yeah, my background's in political science, philosophy, and law, just about as far from tech as humanly possible. But
Yeah.
somehow, well, here we are.
Yep. And luckily you broke out of that and you got your soul back. No more law.
All right, let's bring up the deck.
Yeah, all right. Let's talk about it.
All right, so AWS, and I want to say a big shout out to Corey Quinn for Cloud Trail Lake. Let's talk about this. I think this is from this has some interesting possibilities for the next year to empower companies with a needed feature. Let's talk about the ups and the downs and the ways that how do we want to think about these things?
Yeah, I mean, there's been a demand for a long time for like companies want to do more with their cloud trail data, right? That's it. They're generating a ton of it, and there isn't a great way for them to start to kind of analyze and get a holistic view over all of this stuff. There's definitely demand for this kind of ad hoc analytics environment, this kind of data discovery environment. Um, so I think AWS is meeting the demand for their customers. They're very good at this. This is a brand new service, by the way. This was just announced yesterday, I believe, on January 5th. So I think there's definitely demand here, but let's hope it's early, at least I think first off, from a pricing perspective, man, the pricing is eye watering. And then from a usability perspective, it's not a great interface today, truthfully.
Yeah, I could not agree more. I think this is a concept that has a lot of potential, but when I look at the advertising docs for AWS, they're talking about auditors looking at your CrowdTrail logs, where really I think for most companies the threat hunt activities, but for all sorts of data well beyond CloudTrail was what would be most attractive for this. But that doesn't seem to be possible. And also, you mentioned the search interface. I think that's another huge issue. I don't care how great your storage is. If you can't search it, then what's the point? And so you have to have that combination of searchability, ease of use, and also pricing. I mean, it's crazy. And also, I mean, so on top of the what $2.50 per gig, there's also charging for scanning data. So, for example, if I'm
Yeah.
a security professional and I'm doing a threat hunt activity 30 times a day, I'm scanning potentially a petabyte of data for kind of a mid-sized company, and that costs really add up. And so it's important for companies to look at the usability and also the cost. Does this make sense?
Yeah. And the costs are staggering. Okay. And so effectively the way it works is it's $2.50 a gig for the first 5 terabytes. And then that price falls, I think, to $2 a gig for maybe $1.50 for the next 20 terabytes. And then it falls again, I think 50 cents a gig for the next up to and beyond 25 terabytes. Now, that is a lot of money. I mean, I saw a stat from one of our customers today. They're ingesting 12 terabytes of CloudTrail data a day. And so that really adds up quickly. Now, the upshot is, if you CloudTrail Lake allows you to store that data for up to 7 years. So that's where the auditing story comes in. But it's only cost effective if you're doing that, if you're storing that data for 7 years. So
and if your auditors care.
And if your auditors care, right? And that's the other important point. This is only CloudTrail data, right? This isn't anything else. So because you're effectively, what you're doing is you're taking this data, you're putting it into S3, and you're likely scanning it with something like AWS Athena or some other kind of like on-demand or serverless query service. But you got to have, SQL only works with schema, right? You got to have an externally defined schema. So you're really only putting CloudTrail data in there. So while it's a promising idea, I think it's going to be too expensive for the overwhelming majority of companies. Its utility is limited because you're only talking about CloudTrail data, and the accessibility is also limiting because you're only talking about SQL. You don't really have an opportunity to do time-based analysis or anything like that to see how things have changed over time. So I think that's going to be some pretty limiting factors to CloudTrail Lake.
Yeah, there's some other vendors, particularly Splunk, it's going to be releasing the ability to search an S3 bucket with their own search interface. I think are going to be a lot more attractive and a lot more flexible because you get that lower price, and you're going to get the better search interface, and also be able to mix whatever data you want.
Yeah, and it's about time they did that, frankly. Like that. That seems like such a layup that they just
5 years ago.
Agreed, if not longer. So that's kind of, I thought this was a really interesting idea. We'll see what kind of traction it gets over time. Certainly, AWS is not going to be losing any money on this service. The house never loses. But it'll be curious to see. We'll be tracking this one closely.
Yeah. Yep.
All right.
Let's talk about the state of observability in 2021. So I just want to start. Let's talk about where we see last year now, and then going into 2021, and also just start talking about the idea of, if I'm a mid-sized company, I have a lot of data, I'm interested in this. What are the foundational steps I need to take in order to start taking advantage of observability over the next year? So what do you think, Nick?
I think it's tough. I think this is a really tough proposition for companies to kind of get their arms around, right? Right now, I think, observability is monitoring, right? There's so much confusion between these two different terms. And frankly, if you look at like what the value prop is for observability, right? Being able to find things and discover things that you didn't know before. If I go to my boss and I'm like, hey, I'm looking for a budget for observability, and that's the answer I give him or her, I'm going to get laughed out of the room, right? Like, okay, you're looking for imaginary things. So I think that there has to be, so in 2021, it was very much, a lot of confusion, a lot of what is observability to begin with. I don't know how kind of mature things are at this point. It'll be curious. I'm curious to see where the next 12 months take us. But in 2021, I think we're just getting started, right? People are starting to understand the term. You look at Google Trends data; it's all, what is this thing? So I think we're still just getting there.
I think maturity is the way to put it. Observability starts from a foundation of data, quality data. There is no tool that will solve a lack of data. If you don't have data, it's just the rest of it just doesn't matter. And that from a maturity standpoint, so much of the blocking and tackling of data is instrumentation. It's knowing what you have. It's choosing to use, okay, if I don't have instrumentation, how are we going to gather telemetry? Are we going to use various APM tools? Are we going to use something like Honeycomb? Are we going to use something like Cribl AppScope in order to instrument and get data out of binaries to be effective? Because that's that foundational concept. And you have to then look at standards. You have to look at working with your developers. There's so many things you have to do from a maturity standpoint to reach that foundation of data, then to get good at it. Because observability is possible, but it's like I was lucky enough to have a leader who understood the value of analytics and the value of data, who was willing to put a lot of time and effort behind. Okay, we're going to pick our top 10 applications. We're going to instrument them. we're gonna hire the right person. So I was lucky I had a guy on my team who had a PhD in math. He knew the machine learning aspects of how to do what we needed to do intimately, and then to create that in Splunk. And so we
But
use
you came
Cribl
from a very
Logstream.
mature company anyway,
Right.
though. I mean, like
Well, yeah.
it doesn't seem like you guys did anything kind of halfway, right?
Yeah, and we had the benefit of understanding the vision, but we had a lot of problems with data. But it was nice having the CIO tell the development leaders, you're gonna implement data standards,
Yeah.
and have that. And that's that maturity aspect of driving through that. Okay, we identified 6 golden signals. We made sure that every application and every event had those 6 golden signals available in a very digestible format. Move that data through Logstream. Cribl Logstream optimized it, got it, and we also skipped multiple steps using Logstream in the machine learning, so that when that data landed in Splunk, it was ready to go.
So
So
let's stop. So
yeah,
like I think like if there's something that happened in observability last year, it was that, right?
yeah,
Like you need data if you want observability. I think in my background's data, databases, stuff like
yeah,
that. The blocking and tackling of data management is starting to become aware. Operations teams are starting to become aware of these things, right?
right,
Like data quality. Like I never really cared before because I wasn't doing a whole lot with this data, or it was this number of sources were limited. Now the number of sources feel infinite, and
yes,
the volume feels infinite. And if I wasn't doing a lot with it, who cares what kind of quality that data has? Who cares where it goes or what's in it? But now there's a lot of concern, whether it's governance, risk, and compliance, whether it's ESG becoming a board level topic around data privacy. Now that stuff really matters, and I think you're seeing SecOps teams, IT ops teams are like, we need to manage this data so we can do some
right,
more stuff with it downstream. So that like I feel like that's the big inflection point that happened last year. And you're
yes.
going to see that continue, right? Data management is going to be kind of everybody's job in one way or
I
another.
couldn't agree more. As that you look at that, theoretically, your CISO should be in the data business, because that's so much of its risk, and all those things are built on data, and also data has value. You have to understand what you have. I mean, all these different risk around data governance. And I think finally people are finally getting it, especially with all the security issues. They think about Log4j. Too many companies were like, okay, we know we have Log4j, but we don't know where it is, and we don't know who provided it. We don't know the dependencies. We don't know where it came from. We don't even have a complete list of all of our assets.
Right.
And so it's all about data, and that's the most. It's the foundation of everything.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be the big issue. A former colleague of mine is famous for data is an asset. He invented kind of this topic of infonomics, and if data is an asset, where's the liability side, right? And I
Right.
think that CISOs are very accustomed to thinking about data as liability, but it needs to be they need to have more kind of asset based thinking as well, right? There's got to be a
Yeah.
benefit to it, and hopefully that transition will continue in the new year.
All right. So let's go on to the next.
Yeah.
So what's coming in 2022? So tell me, look into your crystal ball. What do you
Right.
think?
Yeah. Predictions are hard, especially about the future. I don't know who said that, but, so I think what's going to happen, last year, the conversation was a lot about, developers and observability and they need tools and they need distributed tracing and things like that. And I think those are great ideas. But I think there's a lot more that has to happen, right? Like there's a lot of legacy applications out there. How do we observe those? I think three things are going to happen. I think there's going to be a need for a lot more pervasive instrumentation. I don't know what that looks like, right? We've got some ideas here at Cribl. We see a lot of eBPF projects last year, right? Pixie Labs got acquired by New Relic. There was an eBPF summit and a lot of fervor around that, around instrumenting applications and getting more insight. I have some concerns about scalability of eBPF, whether it's, can you collect data at volume using that mechanism without burying your system? Getting data out of kernel space into user space or vice versa is very difficult. And then, the fragility of those kinds of systems, putting kernel extensions into a production system kind of freaks me out. We've got our story with AppScope as well as a kind of black box instrumentation that doesn't use eBPF. But I think what's coming is a lot more instrumentation. for legacy applications as well as greenfield. I think you're going to see search there's going to be some new ideas for search and what that looks like going forward. Not all not just this traditional kind of undifferentiated centralized data collection, right? Like there's a million elk stacks out there, it feels like, or thematically a million elk stacks out there. It all kind of looks the same. I think there's going to be some interesting innovations around search. Maybe CloudTrail Lake turns into some of that. I don't know. And then the last thing is going to be the people side. Just trying to get, as you touched on the top of the broadcast, there's a lot to do. There aren't the people to do it. And so how do we better scale, our observability efforts going forward? That's what I think is going to happen. I don't, we'll see if I'm right, but what do you think, Ed?
I mean, I'm excited about the pervasive instrumentation efforts. I think around AppScope, I think is very interesting. The eBPF story, I think, is really interesting as well. Some companies have done it better than others. I particularly matter as a company called Sysdig. What they've done around Kubernetes is remarkable, but it's also extremely technical. The kind of low-level kernel programming you have to do in order to scalably capture that level of data is non-trivial, and I think that's going to be a significant challenge for companies. It's just not easy.
Yeah.
And as you mentioned, just it's so much data, capturing the right data, doing it at low latency so that you're not swamping your endpoints, but also you need to be able to then ship that data upstream and not swamp your data analytics platform too. I don't care what it is; it can only take so much data. And so that's why you need something like Logstream sitting in the middle to manage that flood. And so those are going to be very important, but it's going to be interesting how that shakes out. And also OTel. Does OTel start to evolve, start to get more in the eBPF story? Is where does it sit in terms of be able to create that generic layer of data to support observability efforts?
OTel's interesting. Like we saw a lot of OTel like mid 2021.
Yep.
It felt like it really kind of like the excitement kind of dropped off a little bit end of the year. I'm a huge skeptic for OTel. You never see innovation coming. You never see innovation coming out of a vendor consortium. Never.
Right.
They're just looking to kind of keep things the way they were and control it. Excuse me. The other side of it could be the security story, right? Like, very developer centric last year. I feel like now there's going to be a huge security story for observability as well. I know that's something you're passionate about.
Very much so. And I think that the security community could really benefit from getting outside its comfort zone in terms of looking at known data sets, known security tools, and looking for the unknown. Because I remember working with some colleagues, and basically like, I don't care what the firewall denied. It's not getting in. The firewall denied it. Why it's just, it doesn't matter. I need to know what got through and what's a danger. And that goes back to the idea of observability, that you're looking for what you don't know. Because like, let's go back to monitoring. For monitoring, you're fundamentally saying, here's the condition. I want to alert if we attach to this condition.
Right.
If you don't have a condition or you don't know what that condition is, then what do you do? And that's fundamentally what observability is for, is to either find that live while you're running, like the project we did at TransUnion, where we were essentially, that's what we were looking at. We weren't triggering alerts based upon known conditions. We were looking at alerts from deviations from what was a known good state. And so the idea is that as we get outside of that known good state, then we start triggering alerts based upon our golden signals. And so that's the idea. Is like, I never forget when I got asked, so what are we alerting on? And I was like, well, we're alerting for change. We're alerting for what we consider to be bad change. Like, for example, you look at volume. We're not going to alert for too much volume, but we're going to alert for not enough volume, or in material drop-offs at odd hours, and and it's a fundamentally different way to look at things. And this I think this goes back also to observability is also I think this is also with an analogy with security, is that you have an idea of a threat hunt, where we're going to take a pool of data and I'm looking for an IP address. So I know this is a bad guy IP address. It's impacted other people. I'm going to look through this our enormous data lake. Where do we find this? What did it do, in order to help drive our detection pipeline for production? So you have this experimental, ask a question, get a result. So think about, like from your background in data analytics, and then you take that and then you apply that to your real-time environment in order to drive your detection. So this is, principles for security and for operations. And that's why I'm hoping the security and operations space drives closer together, because I mean, I think those principles are very much the same for both, and there's no reason to try to exist in silos anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. The expectation has been that, security will just shift left, right? We had DevOps, now we've got DevSecOps. I'm sorry, I just think that's nonsense. Like shift
Sure.
left is just broken. Developers are not incentivized on security. They're just
Right.
not. They're incentivized to ship code as quickly as possible, as rapidly as possible, right? And iterate as quickly as possible. And security is responsible for security. DevOps can ship a new product or a new update whenever they want, but security is responsible for it. So I think that that's still going to be very much, a kind of bifurcated effort. And security is going to be doing more of what they've always done, but just continuing to add more data sources and try and grapple with that volume in a meaningful way.
It's a constant push and pull, and I think that's why we're leaders architecturally, especially the architectural level, have to keep bringing those functions together, because it's just too hard otherwise. There's
Yeah.
not enough people. You just can't attack these things separately in silos, and try to use the same principles, the same tools, and keep improving your data. And that's what I'm hoping. As last year people realized, okay, we need good data. We're going to start putting in programs to get good data. Now we can start marrying that data, because there are some pretty effective observability tools out there once you have data. And I think that's where we can start then, meet in the middle of start getting results. Because like in 2021, I saw too many people like, okay, I'm going to invest in the observability tool of the day, and it just didn't get good results. People get upset. It's like, hey, we bought a tool, but no one did anything about the data.
Yeah.
It's not
Yeah.
magic.
Well, and you see this with AI ops platforms, right? Like,
Yes.
like people are collecting all this data and it's just the data's garbage. The expectation
Right.
is the AI ops platform will do this work for me. Like it will improve the quality of the data. It surprise, it won't, right? Like
Right.
you have to make conscious decisions about how that data is going to end up in your platform.
And that's where and this is coming from, we're a tool vendor, but we got to work with. I encourage architects to look at the foundational needs of what you need to make your tools effective. Buying a tool isn't going to solve a problem. You need that people and process aspect to maturity to mate that with your tools to get the most effective result.
Yeah. I interviewed somebody about it. I'm heavily involved in the data mesh community. And I interviewed Kent Graziano formerly of Snowflake. He recently retired. And he described the data mesh as socio-technical, right? And I feel like that's kind of where observability has to go too, right? It's got to
Yep.
be this socio-technical effort that's not just, you can't just buy it, right? It's not retail therapy.
Right.
You have to, have a concerted effort. Let's move on to the next topic.
All right. So I am excited. I think this is going to move. It takes time.
Yeah. Yeah. So what do we want to get out of this observability stuff? I think we talked a lot about this already, right? Like we're looking for better insight into change, things that we didn't expect that would be happening in our environment. How do we better detect those? But I think it's really, how do we get there, right? Like you can buy the tools, you can hire the people, but for me, I think the story is how do you sell it internally, right? Like okay, great. You found out something new. Did that make me money? Did that save me money? That's what I want to know.
Yeah. I can't tell you how many times I'd get a call from a VP of something or another talking about this next great tool. And because some salesperson had gotten to them. And I was like, you know what? That tool would be awesome if we had that data.
Yeah.
So let's get that data, and that's where I think we're, as an architect and as a leader, you have to start about setting expectations of short term, middle term, long term with observability, because it's just not going to happen day one. I just reminds me, just going back to the security space. I mean, I remember we were looking at Panther had a really good had a really good survey about various SIM providers, and it typically took about 12 months to get a high value alert from a SIM implementation. And I can tell you right now, when the CISO plopped down $1 million+ for that SIM, they weren't expecting to get value out of it a year from now. That's just devastating from a value standpoint. So that's why it's important to, how do you get value? So once you lay down that money for that big tool, how do you get value out of that quickly as possible? And that's why I think that those goals of you set your expectations and put in place your maturity processes of getting that data, then you bring that tool in, because that way once you have that right data, you can then point it at your tool and start getting value really quickly. I mean, let's go back to the TransUnion days where the security team wanted to bring in Exabeam's UBA solution to operate alongside Splunk. And it was a great fit because Exabeam's UBA solution provided a totally different capability than we were able to get out of Splunk. But the question was, how do we get data into it? And that's where Cribl Logstream was help solve that massive implementation issue. Because normally with Exabeam in a Splunk environment, you're saying, okay, we're going to let Exabeam query our Splunk environment, which Splunk admins hate, because you're letting something just plow through your system and start pulling a lot of data, so it impacts your systems dramatically. Or you're installing agents. No one wants to do. No one wants more agents. But by using Logstream, we were able to point a stream of data, a stream of exactly the right data the tool wanted in exactly the right format, and pointed at Exabeam. We were able to get value in 2 to 4 weeks instead of 3 to 6 months.
Let's talk about that. Like you spend $1 million+ on a SIEM tool, and it takes 12+ months to get value from it. Okay, huge amount of value that's unrealized for a long time. But if you're the person who suggested that tool, your credibility is in the toilet at that point.
Yes.
Like you lose a lot of social capital with your boss, with your colleagues. Your boss also loses credibility with his or her bosses. So it has a bigger impact than just, hey, why isn't this software working for me? Right? It can ruin your career, frankly, at that company.
Yeah. It's ugly, and it's a big reason why. I mean, people hate their SIMs. People tend to hate their SIM products, and also migration efforts. People are scared to move off of them. They hate them. They spend too much money on them, and that's why you make those decisions early on of how do we set up our environment to give us choice and control, because think about it. It's like I'm in a new company. I got a SIM. Am I going to go spend $1 million and then not get value for a year, or am I going to stay with the same crappy SIM that I have now? And so those are
the devil, right? The devil,
exactly. Yeah, I mean, this is the reason why QRadar is still in existence, because people are terrified of the effort, the cost, and the risk of moving. And so those are the kind of things that it's tough, and that's why you got to put yourself in position for choice and control. That's why for TransUnion having Logstream in place to be able to, if we need to change vendors, we can change vendors. We remove the risk by doing that. We just remove the risk of change.
Yeah,
and it's just so effective, and also that's how you get there to drive your observability strategy over time. So let's go back and talk about those. So we want to let's call it full security observability. How do we get there? I mean, I think the short term foundational elements, maturity, partnering with your data governance, partnering with your security teams, partnering with your risk and governance teams to first establish what data do you have, what data do you not have, and start understanding your quality gaps. So that's the first thing you do, because then in the middle term, that's where you start putting in place your standards. Then here's how you address these things one by one. And that's where you can bring your leaders in to prioritize. Okay, we need you to step in and use your weight and title that, we need to fix this, and this in order to get to that end solution that we want.
Yeah. I mean, and as part of that partnership though, like it's not just, what end solution do we want? If you do want to partner with the data governance folks, if you want to partner with the privacy folks, you've got to learn their language, right? Like you can't come in dropping a bunch of esoteric acronyms. They don't know what a CVE is, right? You've got to be able to communicate with those folks. I think number one, it's a shared literacy. It's a shared language that you have to figure out, what you want to start to do if you want that partnership to develop. So think about, on a personal level, how do I connect with these people? Like what motivates them? What risk scares them? And then figure out, what language they use in order to do that. And they're going to have to learn a little bit of your language as well. But I think if you want those partnerships to develop, it's going to have to be a shared group of terminology that you kind of settle on.
Yeah, that's well said. And also establish common goals. It's important that typically what your risk and your governance what they want is what you want. They want stability. They want to be able to, so when the auditors come in, they want to be able to say, yes, we're doing this, and make the audits easy. And they want to be able to have, when they present their risk and governance scores up to the C level, everything to be green and not to be red. But I can say, and this is something as I learned a strategy from my favorite CISO, that idea of like taking hostages, the idea that if I need something done, it has to get visibility. And that's why I like to work with the governance people, that we would have a report of, here's the 67 data sources we need, and here's the 31 we don't, and they're all red. And you've got this guy's attention when the CIO is saying, so why is this all red? Why am I seeing this as red? Because then it goes to the board, and you get those board level findings around data governance. You'd be pretty surprised how fast things move. But you got to use the language of executives in order to get their attention, because just going to the development manager and saying, I need you to change your development logging in order to give us better data, they're going to be like, it's not really in our backlog, it's not really prioritized by our product owners, and it'll never happen.
Yeah, agreed. So figure out what motivates them. Mm-hmm. Figure out how they're speaking. Figure out what their language is that they're using. What incentives do they have is the other thing, right? Like what moves the needle on them for their bonus and things like that. So those are all things to think about.
I'll tell you, easy audits. Being able when the audit time comes, and they're able to show, hey, it's all here, it's all done. And instead of having a bunch of tough questions from a bank auditor or someone like that, it's just, you're all set. I mean,
so it'll depend on what industry you're in, what region you're in, but these are just conversations to have as you're getting started, right? If you think about, how do we get to full security observability? How do we get to full observability? These are the kinds of questions you need to start asking.
In smaller environments where it's not as the same sort of risk profile, encourage people to start looking at, there's some really good SaaS services. For example, I think Panther has a really nice service. Sumo Logic has a really nice service around security, where you can simplify a lot of your tasks, and Splunk Cloud has a pretty nice service as well, where you can simplify some of these tasks for less intensive, less customized areas, and stretch your talent. And so there's definitely options, but you've got to find where you are and grow from there. But you've got to focus on that. And that's why the short-term stuff is all about foundational, just like you said, finding out your data, finding out what you're missing, understanding the business goals, and then using the middle term task of, here's how we start to solve those problems. And long term, that's when you bring in the $500,000 $1 million ask of that new security tool, because you can then tell your executives, I have done the foundational work to make this big investment successful.
Yeah. All right, we've been going for about 38 minutes here. Let's keep going.
Okay. Great conversation.
Yeah, this is fun. Oh, I guess that's what we got. All right. So I guess we're wrapping it up. I made these slides. You think I know how many there were? No, I think 2022, we're going to see much more importance around security and observability. Those topics are going to come together. In a lot of our customer conversations today, it is very much governance focused. Because this is a real, boards and CISOs are waking up that this is a real threat. And I think you're going to see less importance, less conversation around developers and observability, much more around operations, security, things like that. I think that's really what I expect to see this year. Hopefully less OTEL, because it doesn't seem to be adding much value today. But I think that's what we're going to see. And how do we get there? Look, it's a conversation. I know everybody just wants to write a check. They don't want to have to talk to anybody. You're going to have to, right? You're going to, these are holistic conversations that have to happen, because observability is fundamentally a holistic practice, right? It is let's bring everything in, let's look at everything and see what our disposition is and how that might have changed over time. So yeah, that's what I got.
I'm encouraged. I think that organizations are going to start to converge. Instead of having the security data team and the operational, they're going to start to converge on single teams and single tools. And in order to get better value, and also about managing your staffing, I think you can get better value out of one team with 4 people instead of 2 teams with 2 people doing essentially the same task. And better tooling, start bringing in the data, start bringing in something like Logstream to help you manage your data, to take choice and control. I think those are very important. I mean, we were recently working with a company who's looking to migrate off their SIM, and also stop the constant, hey, you're running over your license, you need to buy a new license. Stop that conversation and give them the ability, give them the breathing room to migrate away and to get to something better. And that's why I encourage leaders to find the breathing room to make the innovative changes to do this. So we're going to change our org, and we're going to have an observability team for security and operations to get more efficiency, to make the changes of, okay, we're going to stop this in order to give us the ability to migrate and get better value out of our tools.
Yeah.
But you got to have that leadership to do it.
Exactly. Well, listen, this has been our great start to the live streams in 2022. We're going to try and do this weekly, as long as we can. If you have any questions, feel free to drop those. You can find Ed and I both on Twitter, and we can take it from there. So,
yeah, it's been great. Thank you very much, Nick. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Good to see you as always.
Take care. Thank you.
Bye.